So good afternoon. As Asley said, we are in for yet another session of grace and wisdom, and have a wonderful group of women here. We have Kenza Isnazni and Nina Beth Carden and Mary Berry. And as I was going through the bios that we all have of all the many women who are speaking here, what popped into my head was the now famous or infamous Mitt Romney comment about his binders full of women when asked who are the women that you may have on your cabinet, and they wanted more specifics. And he said, I have binders full of women. And I thought, what we have here are women who are not kept in the binder, but have come out of the binder, right? And these are women on the stage and that you've been hearing, and all of us really in this room who are caring about these issues and working every day to make our planet and people a better place to be. We've stepped out of those binders, and we're not waiting for some authority or someone to ask or give permission to go ahead and act. The beauty is that everyone is acting in their own way, in the way that they can. And so I just find it very encouraging that we're all here stepping out of our binders. So I also, we're going to follow the format similar to the other panels where each speaker will present for approximately 15 minutes. Then there'll be some intervention of asking questions or comments from the panelists. And at the very end, we'll open up to questions to you all. And we are especially lucky today. We are going to have an interlude after the three speakers finish their presentations. And that will be, so be sure, and you won't want to leave your seats. It's the Feminine Renaissance of Florence. And this will be presented by Idonna Pucci. And I can tell you, full disclosure, she's a great friend of mine, but she's a fabulous speaker, and you'll really love this presentation, I'm sure. So I thought I would just set a bit of context or tell a story. I was particularly honored and pleased to be asked to moderate this panel because it brings in the planet, and there's a connection to land and ecology. And so often I think we talk a lot about economic injustice and social justice issues and democracy, but often we don't link it to the ecology and the foundation of the planet. And again, full disclosure, I have the great privilege to work at the Berry Center, and Mary and I are often reflecting that there is no social justice or even democracy if you don't have a healthy planet, if you don't have clean water, clean air, and access to all of these things, there's no chance for social justice. So we really need to make these issues, if we're going to come up with holistic solutions, we need to connect all this together. And I'm giving, just to set a context, I just wanted to talk about, give a quick example of how these ecology, human rights, immigration really are closely linked. And that today, especially, we're finding this through a climate change lens, which is really exacerbating and creating food scarcity and water scarcity. And inevitably, this is leading to a lot of political violence and warfare and upheaval. As one example, I think most people, if you talk about the war in Syria, they would be surprised to have climate change in that same kind of conversation. But actually, climate change has a lot to do with the violent conflicts going on in Syria. And here's how. Between 2006 and 2011, more than 60% of Syrian territory experienced the worst drought, long-term drought, in recorded history. Water resources were cut in half. The primary wheat growing region was decimated by about 75% of its crops were lost, 85% of its livestock were lost. So this climate and food crisis triggered a mass migration, well, triggered poverty, which then spurred mass migration of millions of Syrians into already overcrowded towns and cities looking for work. And what this does, of course, is cause friction between cultural and religious groups that perhaps didn't have that friction before, but they're all put together. And it exposes a government's inability or refusal to help and to respond. And we see this all over the world now in some of our most conflict-riddled areas. There's a direct tie-in to climate change-related droughts and scarcity of food and water and lack of basic services that come from the earth. We see this in Yemen, in Niger, South Sudan, Somalia. They're experiencing famine as never before and violence that goes with it. So, as I said before, we know we need holistic approaches if we're really going to have social justice, if we're going to have democracy, if we're going to have enough food to feed ourselves and our families. And this will be a discussion, I think, that we can expand on those connections more. And so I'm really delighted that we'll be talking about that. Our first presenter will be Kenza Isnazni, and she's the co-founder of Marrakesh Organics in Morocco. She's a humanitarian activist who is sensitive to the questions related to human rights, education, climate change, and environmental protection, interfaith and intercultural dialogue. She recently received her International Relations and Diplomacy degree with a concentration in peace and conflict studies, and she is currently researches on the link between climate change and migration in the Senegal River Valley. So please welcome Kenza.
Today, I'll be taking you on a trip to Northern Africa. Are you ready? So you will discover the place that has reconnected me with a reality that takes its time, advances at its own rhythm, and moves with a lot of humility. I live in a village, a traditional rural community near Marrakesh. But if you had told me just 5 years ago that I'll be living in rural Morocco, I would have said, no way. But when we listen to our inner voice, we can never be lost. We will always be guided by the true voice in our hearts. During a period of my life when I was looking for meaning, my conscience, my old memories with my family in the countryside in Morocco, witnessing the respect my grandparents had for the natural order, those moments inspire me profoundly. My grandparents talked to trees, plants, animals. They were so loving and gracious to them. Only later did I realize the depth and wisdom of such connections. Also, it was during my studies on climate change and migration in the Senegal River Valley that my environmental conscience grew even bigger. The cases and the data I was studying were very alarming, and I knew I had to become part of the solution. When I met my lovely husband, Omar, who has just started an organic farm, we had a joint vision that this place not only serve a commercial farm, but a social enterprise and a community empowerment base. That was the start of our project, Marrakesh Organics, which has now organized over 20 international courses and events in environmental education, spirituality, and wellness. The feedback and the gratitude we get back from our guests is very empowering. With the blessings of the Creator, we have built a safe space, a healing circle, and a place of community bonding. We, as stewards on the earth, custodian of the land, are asked to cultivate the earth and reap its bounties in celebration and gratitude, but our actions nowadays are not of tending and nurturing, but mining, abusing, exploiting our very land base. This is the testament of the true state of our hearts and minds, because how we treat the earth reflects how we treat ourselves and others. When we perceive the earth as landfill, we will treat our bodies as landfills. And when we perceive the land as profits to be mined, then we will certainly treat fellow humans as commodities. When we learn to cultivate the soil and bring life back to it, we're actually refining and perfecting our souls, regenerating our soils through reforestation, good water management, and soil building has become the work of our times. It is our real capital. Growing and feeding our communities wholesome food has become a revolutionary act. Cultivating the land benefits all organisms and creates wealth and biodiversity. It is also a constant act of charity, as our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is noted as saying, "Anyone who plants a tree or food crop, and all humans, animals, or birds eat from it, that will be reckoned on the day of judgment as charity for them." Our farm has over 600 olive trees on little over 6 hectares of land. The olive trees have tremendous meaning in our faith and traditions. It is a blessed tree mentioned in the Quran. Its oil has an amazing health and therapeutic benefits. We call it green gold. And I have some here from Morocco. In our tradition, our bodies are never disconnected from our spirits and the heart. The body, the soul, the intellect, or the spirits are all in the end different names for the same thing. We live in our bodies, and feeling good physically translate to feeling good mentally and spiritually. And feeling good physically starts with what we eat and how we eat it. The very act of eating and drinking is a sacred ritual. As our world burns because matters have been entrusted in the worst of us, as we continue applying infinite growth principles in a finite planet as a greed for resources in generating wars and displacement, we, more than ever, must take matters into our own hands and create a better future for our communities. Marrakesh Organics is developing the farm of the future, a farm that integrates the best of ancient wisdom with the most effective scientific knowledge and appropriate technology. We have transformed damaged, arid ancestral land into a lush, abundant, and peaceful sanctuary for family, guests, and community, a space that promotes sustainable living, produces wholesome foods, and through our programs and workshops inspires people to go back to their roots and hear their selves and community. We are preparing and developing strategies for the difficult times ahead, with droughts, displacement, and climate change on the rise. We must equip people with the necessary knowledge to tackle these hardships, with joining or forming their own communities or healing circles where everyone is taken care of by everyone else. That is the only way we can thrive. I also strongly believe in healing power of nature. And the more we become aware and conscious of how we treat her, the more evolved and refined we become spiritually. Nature is full of signs. It is what one of my teachers called the great mosque. And I would add the great church, the great synagogue, the great temples. An environment that triggers deep contemplation and sacred communion with the divine. It teaches us that we are part of something much greater, humbling and full of beauty that sometimes we don't fully recognize. Living in a rural community, our true wealth becomes the abundance of the land and the genuine bonds between its people. Generosity, care, the safety of knowing people will be there for you when you need them, or make life so rich and fulfilling. Time is slow, and people enjoy telling stories with the tiniest details. Their stories are so fascinating and have taught me so much and inspired the development of our activities in Marrakesh Organics. It is a shame that we so often perceive rural people's life as miserable. The patience and the forbearance of these women is remarkable, and their level of solidarity is very touching. In trying to understand their reality, I realized that there was so much we could learn from them. Now, our farm employs about 20 people part-time, more than half of them women. Women from our community are an integral part of Marrakesh Organics. They pass on their culinary knowledge, their traditions, their vision of the world. We don't need to save them from their misery, as some falsely assume. It is them who are waking up from the delusion of modernity and the insanity of a world going too fast and losing all values and principles. With their inspiration, Marrakesh Organics is bringing back old principles and values to the core of its mission. I remain greatly optimistic for the future when I see all the renewed interest in local food production and well-being. So many people are becoming conscious of the detrimental ways of modernity and are slowing down and looking for alternatives. Our farm hosts over 300 visitors a year from all over the world. This has made a cultural hub in the community, and people's ideas evolve when they come into contact with other cultures. When our communities see that people are going back to traditional building, farming, or food preparation techniques, they become proud of their heritage. Changing mentalities has been the most difficult part. Because of globalization, local people become convinced that they don't have enough. This in turn creates envy, shame, and disappointment. That's why we lead by example, never forcing anything on them until they make the connections themselves. As our permaculture teacher, Ramis Kent, puts in so well, intending to land, the goal is to extract some sort of output or yield to produce things. This tending to land is a means by which we are able to perfect ourselves. We are able to refine our character, to be able to fully realize what is to be human. Instead of looking on ourselves as being separate from the way that nature functions or what nature does, we are just another expression of the divine attributes that are embodied in this assembly of living elements and non-living elements. We are part of this terrestrial body. Land will tell the truth about ourselves. Look at the way how people treat it. We are a product of industrialization. We have been shaped by the ideas that brought us industrialization, in which the earth has been despiritualized, it has been desacralized. I will end on a good note, for there is always hope. The good news is that dead and degraded land can be restored and regenerated. As it is said in the Quran, God brings dead soil back to life. And if we mimic the way of nature, we too can bring our souls and our hearts back to life. It is only a matter of humbling ourselves and collaborating with nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned economic globalization, and I'm assuming that you started an organic farm in response perhaps to something that's happening in your country in agriculture, right, to show another way. I know when I worked a lot in economic globalization, the U.S. tends to export the worst of itself, I'd say, our worst things, and one of them would be our industrial agriculture practices and spreading that as modern progress around the world. And I'm just wondering, in Morocco, have you seen evidence of things like that happening, and is that partly what you're responding to with Marrakesh Organics?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can see that in our region especially, there is like a huge place where the conventional agriculture and the use of chemical fertilizers is just crazy. I mean, it's growing in more, and Morocco is the producer of phosphate, so it's the main component of the chemical fertilizers. And for example, I can take the example of Lassen, who's working with us on the farm. He came from the conventional agriculture, and for them, just this idea that we can grow food without putting any product on the soil, it was something very unimaginable. So it took for us like 2 years to convince him that it's working. So this is the way how we work with farmers, for example, and how we came up with this idea to develop a demonstration site. So to show them that these technologies, these methods are working on the ground, and that's.
And ultimately more viable for economies, right? And perhaps, I don't know if the two of you might have comment on that. I was especially struck too about land being, what we said here, natural capital, and how that provides more security. And I don't know if the two of you maybe would have a comment on.
I just love to hear you. The second day I've gotten to hear you. Today was wonderful.
Thank you.
I was really struck by your talking about the idea that rural people are miserable. And I think that's an idea that has been deeply harmful in this country. On the last panel, maybe you said it, I don't remember who said it, but that when indigenous people are studied, I suppose, they're often called childlike or primitive. And I think that's a ridiculous kind of understanding. The women that I grew up around, my mother included, their knowledge was complicated and deep. And so I just appreciated that, and I'm interested also. I think that a lot of the problems that I deal with every day at the Berry Center only belong in the United States of America, because our farmers are completely cut off from the information that they need the most. I'll talk a little about that. So I was interested to hear that it seems it's amazing how fast that local knowledge is lost. I said to a group of young farmers recently in a meeting, you could raise organic corn. I can't remember the context, but to add value. And that was greeted with not derision or not, people didn't argue with me. They acted like I had just said, and there's a sleeping princess in this room, and if you go in and kiss her, she will wake up and make all your dreams come true. I mean, it's just an amazing thing how fast we've lost knowledge.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about your studies about peace and the work on the farm and how they coalesce.
Wow, good question. Yeah, this is my favorite part actually on the project. I believe that because we have a lot of people coming and for different reasons, and I realized that if we work on human health, environmental health, and intercultural understanding, we can bring peace to the world. These three elements are essential, and and this is, based on my experience, this is the thing I can one of the conclusions I came up, these last years.
Great, thank you.
Kind of the land is the core. You have to have those healthy land in order to have peace.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
You do?
I'm also struck by the story, and we see it again around the world, of these notions of progress, right? We think that we're bringing progress, especially in the U.S. around the world. We think we're bringing progress. And you mentioned, I think, that people were made to feel rather backward when a lot of these economic globalization forces come in. And I know, like, for example, in India, when I worked there a lot, and women making these beautiful rotis out of, grains that were whole and from there, basically down the road, and they were gorgeous. And American companies come in and advertise that white bread is what wealthy people have, and so they wanted to change the whole culture and have been quite successful in different countries doing so, such that many other groups from civil society now go back in and say, no, actually, brown bread is the cool thing, or whatever. So do you also have any observations about this kind of notions of progress and what it's doing to the social cultural fabric in your country?
I can talk about our, community. In our community, they are, of course, especially youth, they're exposed to all these, ideas, and of course, when we talk about agriculture, they perceive that it's backwards. Mm-hmm. They perceive that it's, they have to move, to travel, to migrate, and they don't value that the land can produce this, the work they can, contribute to the society and to the community. And of course, they're struggling with these ideas, but now we can see that it's changing in a way. And maybe after the climate conference, the climate change conference that we host in Marrakesh 2 years ago, we had all these officials and institutions, and I think something changed. And the more we value, I think we value what their job, what they're doing in agriculture and in rural areas, the more they will be proud of what they're doing. They're
creating a local pride in what they're doing, yeah. And the climate conference really brought in this energy of, again, here are all these things that people thought maybe were backward, but really it's the way forward,
exactly.
and it
it's
is
the
only way forward for the future, right, for us to survive. All right, thank you. We'll continue this discussion, but first we'll hear now from Nina Beth Carden. I know you all heard her this morning. I'll just quickly read her bio again in case you missed her. She's a rabbi, author, and environmental activist. She founded the Jewish Women's Resource Center in 1978. She was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1988. And in 1994, she was the founding associate director of the National Center for Jewish Healing. And you're quite a founder. And in 2006, she founded the Baltimore Jewish Environmental Network. She's been a general consultant to the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. And in 2011, she founded the Baltimore Orchard Project, which grows and distributes fruit to the poor in Baltimore. So please join me in welcoming Nina Beth Carden.
Thank you. I say that I have professional ADD. I just get founding things and handing them off. But by the way, if you ever want to be a grandmother prematurely, just found an organization, then hand it off to a staff and a board, and watch them run with it. And it's just wonderful. I just want to say a couple words about the Baltimore Orchard Project, which is why I think I was invited for this session. But then I want to speak about what motivated me to create the Baltimore Orchard Project, the underlying theoretical foundation. So the Baltimore Orchard Project has been in existence for about 7 years now, and its goal is to bring fruit to common areas, commonly owned areas in Baltimore City, mostly in the areas where can you take these lights down a teeny bit so I can see the audience just a little better? Is that possible? If you could, that would be great. And what we do is we work with, not for, but we work with, oh, okay, that's another way of doing it. We work with communities in Baltimore City mostly, congregations, schools, neighborhood associations that own or at least have the rights to manage communal space, which is now either degraded or just vacant, otherwise underutilized. And what we do is we say, why not take what is seen as a sort of a detriment to the community, something that is not being productive, something that actually can invite either vermin or other unwelcome activities, and turn it into an asset. One of the things we wanted to say is that this vacancy is an asset. It's not a blight. It's an asset that's just not being realized. And then we work with them, and it's not just orchards. I said we ain't just trees. In order to have healthy orchards, you need healthy soil. You need an environment. You need an ecology. You need smaller plants. You need what they call guilds of plants, so that you will bring the right insects to do the pollination and repel the wrong kinds of insects. And so what we do is we actually take places that otherwise are overlooked or, as I say, sort of badly used, and turn them into green spaces. And we, in the process, open people's hearts to saying, oh, you know what, nature's not out there. Nature's not just something out there, but it's right here. And not only is it right here, it's something that I can absolutely interact with. And we have about 100 orchards now, so that means we have 100 partners. We have harvested from existing fruit trees that people otherwise like to chop down because they think it's messy when the fruit drops. We say, well, I tell you what we can do about that dropping fruit. Let's harvest it. Maybe if we get it first, then we can give it away. We've given away 15,000 pounds of urban fruit that would otherwise go to waste and also just sort of litter the ground. But we also are, as I say, changing people's hearts and minds. It's wonderful and very difficult, by the way, to get people to embrace orchards. In gardens, if you plant in March, you've got something to harvest, in May or June. But you take a tree and you put it in the ground and you mulch it and you water it and you bless it and you watch it, and then you wait. And one of the things that we do is we teach these children especially the virtue of patience and a vision of the future, because many of them don't have visions of the future. And we can teach them that over the course actually of a school year, because if we plant in the fall and then we come back, and we measure them, by the way, we measure them and we measure their tree. And then we come back in the spring, or we come back the following fall, and that tree has grown in a significant way that you can measure. And they haven't always grown as much. It's always interesting to see. But they sort of own the growth and the potential future of the tree. And they believe in a future, which is really quite wonderful. So they believe in the sense of engaging at nature right here in the city. And we also teach them, by the way, why don't people ever plant, like, say, gardens right there, or why was that land vacant? Because people often are afraid that it's tainted, it's toxic, who knows what, lead or whatever. And we say, you know what trees do? Fruit trees, as well as other trees, fruit trees will sequester the toxins in that poison soil. So it will not only give you a healthy piece of fruit you can be comfortable eating, but it, in fact, in the process, cleanses the environment for them. And you want that to be cleansed, not just because you don't want the fruits to be poisoned, but if there's lead for something in that soil and kids play in it, they can get poisoned just by playing in that vacant lot. So we do so many things to rejuvenate these communities, and having these children come back year after year to see the growth of their tree is quite rewarding. But what motivated me to do this? There's a phrase in Psalm 119, and it says, Ger anochi ba'aretz. I am a stranger. I am a sojourner. I am a guest on this earth. And I have to tell you, I have been so moved by this concept of being just a guest on this earth, that we are all fleeting. We are all transient. We are only here temporarily. And what hubris does it take for us to think that we can so transform the earth in the short span of time that we are here to our liking for our selfish purposes and not think about first the gift that was given to us by others who didn't ruin the earth and those who come after us? What hubris that is. I really sometimes can't sleep at night for the selfishness that makes me think we are living. So we didn't create this world. We didn't dream up this world. We didn't forge this world. We only have a right to use it lovingly and to use it in a way that, like the tree, will improve it and give gifts to others. We are here as a sort of unconditional but unearned guests of the earth. You know, we didn't earn to be born. We didn't earn the gift of our family. We didn't earn the gift of community. We didn't earn the gift of culture and wisdom and science. We are gifted at, and we then therefore have to understand how to answer two very important questions. How shall we be good guests? And then in turn, how shall we be good hosts? And actually, etymologically, if you go back to the root, guest and host is one word. It's a common word. Why? You can't have one without the other, is one thing. And two, because once you are gifted as a guest, there is an obligation to turn around and be host to others. So what does it take to be a good guest? One is to be grateful, especially if it's unearned guestness, right? To be grateful for whatever comes to you. To be satisfied with enough. You know, just if you are given something and it is sufficient. It's not exorbitant, it's not abundant, it's not over the top, it's just sufficient. The blessedness of sufficiency. Mary Poppins, one of the great rabbinic scholars, of the world. Mary Poppins said, do you remember this? Enough is as good as a feast. She says it very fast, it's almost hard to see in the movie, but enough is as good as a feast. Just sufficiency is enough to fill us, and we should have gratitude. We should travel lightly. If you're moving around, you don't want to schlep a lot of luggage, so for your own sake, you should travel lightly, but also for those around you. You don't want to burden them with all of the emotional, the physical, ecological garbage that you might be carrying with you. You have to be forgiving. Your host isn't going to be perfect. Hosts are human too, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're not always going to be as responsive to you. So to be a guest is to learn to be gracious in the sense not just of gratefulness, but to be forgiving, of the other, which means making room for the other, by the way. And to be a good guest is to offer thanks. So that's being a good guest. What does it take to be a good host? Hospitality is about letting go, about giving up what you believe is categorically yours. It's about having and knowing that you are so blessed to have that you can share. Being a host is a gift. If you don't host, if you don't have things to host with, you are bereft. As something that I read said, if you don't welcome people into your home, if you don't host, then all you have is an address, and not a home, right? It's a place, but it doesn't open itself up. Hosting teaches us to accept imperfections in ourselves and in others. There's being a hosting guest, and we could spend a whole seminar on just what does it mean to be the good guest. Maybe someone's trying to talk through me, right? A good guest and a good host. So in thinking about this, being a rabbi, I obviously go to my tradition, and in my tradition it was very interesting. I saw two ways of being a guest, two ways of being a host, of offering hospitality. And they're reflected in agricultural practices, which is why I'm spending so much time on that here. So the one way of being a host is in the Jewish word tzimtzum. It is to withdraw. It is to make room for somebody by pulling yourself in. It's what we do when we move over on a bench, right? It's what we do when we stop speaking and you allow somebody else to step into the silence. It's what we do when we say, we shouldn't own all of this. For now, I will cede some of what I own and I will lend it to you. So Tzimtzum is a way to be a host. The Kabbalists, the mystics of Judaism, say that that's how God created the world. Because in the beginning, God filled the world. There was an enormity of godness, and that was the universe. And in order to make room for us to survive, to live, to be free to move, God had to withdraw, it's astonishing because most of the time we want to say how God is present in the world, and God is. But the Kabbalists said God also had to make room for us. If God can make room for us, then surely we can make room for others. And the Peah, Leket, Shichacha that I spoke about this morning, those 3 ways of agricultural humility, where you give the corners of your field over to the poor, where you don't pick up what you dropped because it meant that you had too much anyway, where you leave behind what you forgot. That's a sort of tzimtzum. That's a way of saying, I understand I don't own all this land, that I am sharing it with others, and I will withdraw and let others share the land with me. But the other type of hospitality is harchava, is opening up, is welcoming in. We also do this on a daily basis. Women in pregnancy create space where there wasn't before by opening up. You can stand here and talk to somebody, but when they want to give you a hug, all of a sudden there is this space in which you enter that didn't exist before. Or when a child wants to be hugged, you uncross your legs and you create a lap. You open yourself up. And agriculturally, Judaism says that by the sabbatical year, the Shemitah year, the 7th year, just as we have a weekly cycle of 6 days and a Sabbath, the Bible says that we should have a yearly 7-year cycle of 6 years and a 7th year of rest. And by the way, that has been going on since the biblical period until today. We still have in the Jewish calendar a cycle of 6 years of normal, hopefully restorative and healthy work, but a 7th year of rest. Shemitah year, the 7th year of rest, agriculturally means that my fields that I own, that I plow, that I work, that I put fences around, are no longer my fields. In that 1 year, my fields revert back to the way of the commons. The earth is owned by everyone, and it is only because of necessity that we carve it up into segments so that we each can work it. And when we so believe that we own that space, as William Blackstone said, an English economist long ago, said that we believe that we own that as in despotic dominion, that we have a right to exclude others and do whatever we want on that space, that's when things start going awry. And that's where economy and ecology just merge together to ruin the environment and therefore the social world in which we live. And what the Shemitah year says is that every 7th year, you have to release what you own. It is literally a release. You have to release what you own. Tear down your fences. Let everyone come to your land the same way that you come to your land now. Return the land to the commons. And the Bible says what you might say, well, what are we going to live on? What are we going to eat? And the Bible says the land will provide and God will provide. How will the land provide? The land will only provide because during those 6 years we have been so nourishing of the land, right? Not destroying the land by over fertilizing it and all, but we have been doing like the trees, we have been restoring the land so that the 7th year is actually not a year where the land has to lie fallow because it's been overused and overabused. Rather, the 7th year is a land of abundance where we can all live without the land even being needing to be worked because it is so rich and abundant. It's a hard sell. But what I love about it is that what it says is that every 7 years you are reminded that you are a guest and that you have responsibilities to the land. And I'm just going to go like 1 minute over, because in addition to that Shemitah year saying that you no longer own that land and it is returned back to the commons, and we all have equal access and equal ownership and equal claim to the earth, which is the way we started. there's also an economic component. All debts are erased. It is a reset. It is a reset on the use of the land. It's a reset in the economy. And here's the thing. It doesn't only come every 7 years. If in year 2 you come to me and say, I'd like a loan. Nina, would you give me a loan? I'm going to say, well, let me see. This is year 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to know that in another 4 or 5 years, I'm going to have to release my land. And you will either have given me back my loan, or I will have to release that too. But the thing is, we all get a reset. We're all down back again to being equal in owning and understanding that we all own the earth in commons. And then the year after the Shemitah year, we go back to that ownership, to the private ownership, but hopefully better aware of the fact that this is temporary. And we all owe each other the sense of taking care of each other, and taking care of the land, and taking care of the economy, and taking care of land, economy, and each other all go together. Thanks.
Thank you, Nina. I was struck by, well, everything, of course, but could you speak a little more about the faith traditions and the sense of stewardship to the earth?
Yes.
I know that's a huge subject.
Well, it is a huge subject, and I was reading something by Wendell Berry just the other day, who helped explain in Genesis, our calling is to take care of the earth. Genesis 2 tells us that we are created. Why did God create humanity? According to Genesis, God created humanity. Excuse me, I might want to cut the mic for a sec. Okay, we're good. Thank you.
Want some water?
Want some water?
That's all right, I'll take it in a second. God created humanity because there were 2 things that earth was missing: rain and someone to take care of the earth. So God wanted someone to take care of the earth. God would provide the rain, right? And then God would provide humanity to take care of the earth. And that we are put on this earth, le'ovda u'lashamra, to work it. Because, as your dad says, you work the earth, right? But to take care of it, to steward it, to be precious with it, right? They go hand in hand. It's like a yin-yang thing, or I don't know what we from your tradition does, but it's all together. But your father also said, but that's sort of in the ideal, that's the mythic, that's the Eden version of things. And then he talks about Leviticus and in the land, when the Jews went into the land of Israel, these cyclical years, 7-year cycles, remind us that we are stewards, yes, but even more, I find more powerful, that we're guests. Mm-hmm. And you do not go into somebody's home and leave their home worse off than when you got there. You leave their home at least as beautiful, if not even a little better. You bring gifts when you're guests, and we should imagine ourselves as bringing gifts to the earth, and that's a stewardship too.
Yes. It's astonishing, in a century we've managed to basically wipe out so many of the wild creatures and planet and air and water because of our patterns of living and consumption, which came up yesterday. And in your tradition too, there must be, in the Quran, obviously talk of stewardship on the earth and such. Is there something that you could share about that as well?
Yeah, in the Quran we have a lot of verses, and in our tradition, land, nature, animals are mentioned many times in our verses, and we have this. The body is considered as a trust, so we must take care of it. It's not our body. It was just for, and there is also another. You mentioned we're here like as a guest, and it's we have one of my teacher put in different ways. He says that this world is not our paradise; it's the paradise of animals, and yeah, I find it very interesting to also guests.
Traditions limit us. They provide us a context to live in that limit the harm that we should do, and somehow that's failed here.
Exactly.
Well, because our culture has taught us that we can be limitless in many
Right.
ways, right? That we can do whatever we want. And again, this notion of progress and that modern, whatever technology or the other isms you want to believe in is going to make it so we can do whatever we want.
Well, the idea of being all you can be means you're going to have to move somebody out of the way,
Right.
doesn't it?
But also with the economic externalities where we make things and then we ignore the offshooting of it, and we make others pay for it, both with their health and with their money. We aren't responsible. We're not good guests. We're not responsible for what we, one, for what we do, but two, the other thing is, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about this too, one of the stunning lessons that I learned is that nature knows no waste. That is, it totally recycles. This concept of waste or excess or something that is sort of beyond the normal just realm is just, and that you can throw things away. It's just not a natural concept, and we so imbibe that. As long as they're trash cans, that's great. We put it in the trash can and we're good. Even in recycling, put it in the recycling. That like that's good. But we don't imagine the full life cycle of what these are. And if we understood that there is no such thing as waste, everything comes back, everything ends up in us, everything ends up in the environment, we would, from the time we dreamed of creating something, which we should do, dream of creating things, we would dream of creating how it goes throughout its entire life cycle.
Right. And when we're in harmony with nature, there is that circular pattern, right, as you say, with no waste. Versus today, the paradigm, and I hate to bring this up, but it's frankly, we have, the other day I was speaking with someone about saying, oh, there's this great way we can take all the methane of the cattle that are in these, what we call concentrated, feedlots, and make that into some regenerative kind of energy. But thinking of the insanity of even just thinking, and first of all, we're creating a waste that we wouldn't be creating if we were really using those animals or living with those animals in a proper relationship, right? So we've gotten so disconnected, I think, sometimes of what things can be, that there doesn't need to be waste, that it's twisted our whole notion of even what is recyclable and things like that, right? So, okay, we'll continue this discussion, and Mary is going to add yet another level upon it. Mary Berry is the founder and executive director of the Berry Center located in Newcastle, Kentucky. She spent most of her life farming, beginning in her parents' Lane's Landing Farm by her parents Wendell and Tanya Berry. And her own extensive experience farming has expanded and provided her notion for the creation of the Berry Center and the programs that are happening there. And we like to say our tagline at the Berry Center is we are advocating and continuing putting Wendell Berry's actions and legacy into writing through advocating for farmers, land-conserving communities, and healthy regional economies. So Mary speaks all over the country as a proponent of sustainable agriculture, small farmers, and rural communities. So please welcome Mary Berry.
Thank you so much. Whoever's listening to me up in the booth, don't listen to me for a minute. I'm going to say two directly contradictory statements. One is that I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be with my fellow panelists, and I've heard them a couple of times now, and other women and men speaking here, and I feel inspired and grateful for the opportunity to take part in the conversation. Now, this is what you shouldn't listen to. My mother and Christy Brown are right over there. I can see them. Yeah, I know, it's good. Except that you can imagine how I feel right now. I'm just going to not look over there. Christy told me that I should tell my own story, my personal story, but I come from a tradition that we affectionately call the frozen chosen. So that's hard for me, but I will say a bit about why I started the Berry Center. It was certainly, I had a lot of things on my mind the couple of years before the Berry Center started. Somehow, and I'll talk more about this, it had become clear to me that after years and years and years of work and belief in something called the local food movement, that the farmers in our area were not, they had taken part, but they were not, things weren't getting better for them. In fact, we were losing farmers and farmland faster and faster and faster. I also had a marriage that ended and left the farm that I'd been on for 30-some years. And in that little period of time, my father and I had something that we had on our minds that we wanted paid attention to by the powers that be in Louisville. And who would you go talk to about something like that? Then, well, Daddy sent me to Christy and Owsley. And we talked about what Daddy and I had on our minds, and they very kindly said that they would keep our ideas being talked about. And then Christy said, well, what are you going to do? Well, I didn't know what I was going to do. And that was really the dawn of the Berry Center and the start of a new life for me. Not expecting that other people would take care of what needed to be done in rural Kentucky, but that I would join the, dare I say, fight to keep what is precious. So there you are. That was my emoting part of the talk. That's it. No more. But I did very much appreciate the Lynn Twist saying that pain pushes and vision pulls, because the pain did push me toward activism, and the vision that I had inherited from 8 generations of farmers that are my forebears in Henry County, Kentucky, gave me hope and life and so on. So, okay, now I'm really done with that piece of it. I've just got written here, enough is enough. And I think it's about something else, but I think it's a good, it's helpful. My mother, Tanya Berry, says in the documentary Look and See that a lot has been left out lately. She is talking about the way we live now as opposed to the way we could live, wholly and contentedly in our homes and communities, doing as little harm as possible to the land and the creatures and the people who live near us. My aim today is to make an argument for a land-based economy that takes everything into account, and to suggest some ways that might happen. My home is farm country in north central Kentucky. Maybe I should say that I'm going to take you all on a trip too. It's 40 miles northeast of here, but in some ways it's about as far as Morocco. I have lived and farmed there all of my life, first by birth and then by choice. My great-grandfather said after the first and only trip he ever took in his life, I didn't see anything I liked better than the field behind my barn. I am his true heir. While I believe that it would be a mistake to have my vision confined by my home place, I am sure that my love for one place has allowed me to have a frame of reference for what has happened to rural America that is often, too often, missing in the efforts to do something about our toxic, erosive, land and people-destroying economy. I live every day with the consequences of what is happening to our countryside. While I am grateful for the traveling I have done and the places I have seen, nothing has tempted me away from the beautiful, maybe unremarkable, and now threatened landscape of my home country. Even now, this country so familiar to me is also strange to me. It still is the only place I want to live. I know that it is strange to my husband, a lifelong farmer and a descendant of generations of farmers. That's the new husband. Anyway. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm pretty happy about it, too. And now I continue. I know from my father's writing and my daily conversations with both of my parents that they feel the strangeness of it every day, but there we stay. Farmland and farming communities all over this country are in decline or have been swallowed up by our industrial agriculture and economy. In that, we are tragically the same as other rural places all over the United States and the world. A difference here is that the decline in my part of Kentucky can be directly tied to the loss of the Burley Tobacco Program. The program ended in 2004, which gives us 14 years to see what happens to a farm culture when its economy is removed. The Burley Tobacco Program defended a crop that turned out to be indefensible, and so I believe the program and its principles have been quickly forgotten. It was the only farm program, a price support, never a subsidy, that served the people it was supposed to serve, the small family farmers. Because it limited production of a high-value crop, it protected farmers and the farms from overproduction and encouraged a pretty highly diversified farm economy from 1941 until the program ended. For once and for a while, we had a fairly stable farm population that supported the little towns in our part of the country. We had a farm culture of shared work. Differences in political and social issues didn't matter much when our economy was stable, but they now matter absolutely. The community is polarized because we have lost our shared culture. We have all the problems that have been discussed here for the last few days. For years, starting in the late 80s, many of us worked hard to ready our farm communities for the end of the tobacco economy. What would come after tobacco was the question that started meeting after meeting. We hoped that our farmers, and I was one, would benefit from a local food movement that was in full swing. My husband, Steve Smith, and I speak often of our attempts to keep farming without tobacco, which we did successfully on different farms. He started the first CSA in Kentucky, which we thought an historic event that would begin the change we needed. His accounting, shared publicly, proved that a farmer could make more per acre by raising vegetables than could be made on tobacco. He and I talk often of our attempts to keep farming without tobacco, which we did successfully. However, we believed all those years ago that our entrepreneurial work was to keep making farm payments, while we believed, naively it turned out, that there would soon be a local food system that farmers would join. What has happened is that corporations moved faster than farmers could and took over production of organic food. Our mistake was to think that local farmers were necessary to this effort. But the industry didn't need us. They could take care of food production much more cheaply and efficiently by cutting corners on the care of the land, waterways, animals, and communities. I remember with much regret meeting after meeting with my family that my family and I took part in to get farmers to talk about opportunities post-tobacco. I say regret because the rooms were full of farmers. It is much harder to fill a room with farmers now than it was then. And since then, we lead the nation in the loss of farmland. Those meetings were difficult because farmers were scared, and to talk about the end of tobacco was considered heresy. But we did succeed in having some meaningful talk. Many of our local farmers did try local production for local markets, but they soon gave up on a market they didn't understand and didn't trust. And in those days, we began to get some understanding from the health community that to lose these small farmers who were dependent on the tobacco economy would not ultimately benefit the health of our state or our nation. What has come after tobacco? Addiction to drugs and the toxic, erosive production of corn and soybeans. And so, we did not sacrifice our farms and farm communities for health. I must be very careful here to be clear that I am not speaking for tobacco. I am, however, speaking in defense of the program that kept land-conserving communities stable for 63 years and for the people and the land that it protected. Good farming comes from a passion, a calling that must be supported by an economy and a culture that values it. We have had precious little of that understanding in this country. It is hard to find a time in history when people who understood good land use have been valued. My grandfather, John Berry Sr., understood this, and it is his vision on which we founded our work at the Berry Center. He was the principal author of the Burley Tobacco Growers Cooperative. My grandfather did the important work, my father says, and he and his brother just took it up. My brother Dan and I have now taken it up along with family, friends, the Berry Center board, and exceptional co-workers. My grandfather was born in 1900 and died in 1991. My 3 daughters were born onto a farm and into a way of life that would not have existed without the work of their great-grandfather. In the years since they were born, my youngest child was born in 1990. That way of life has nearly disappeared. I need to start talking a lot faster. My grandfather remembered his father coming home from the sale of his 1908 tobacco crop with nothing after paying the warehouse fees. He would tell us that he remembered farmers leaving tobacco warehouses with tears running down their faces, and he would say, "I thought then, if I can do something about this, I will." And he did. He understood that the free market would never work for farmers, that they must be protected from their own inability to control production, either because the market is good and they are encouraged, or the market is bad and they are desperate. Why am I telling you about a defunct program that defended an indefensible crop? Because we are desperate for good examples of agrarian thought, and this is one. Because of the loss of the program seemed to mean, in the halls of official agriculture, the loss of the principles of the program. No one is talking about the problem of overproduction, although the countryside is being destroyed by it. Just now in Henry County, 2 farm families have been told that Dean's Milk will, as of the end of May, not be picking up their milk anymore. There is a surplus of milk in the U.S., even a surplus of organic milk. When interviewed about the 100 dairy farm families that are losing their livelihood in Kentucky, the representatives of Extension and state government said that they were reviewing the situation, but offered no actual help. The executive director of the Kentucky Dairy Development Council wrote in the Farmer's Pride, a Kentucky newspaper for farmers, that for the terminated farmers, it may not be profitable to stay in the business. Each producer will need to make that decision for their family and business. In other words, farmers are alone with their troubles, as farmers have nearly always been. A Shelby County Extension agent is quoted in the Sentinel News saying, "The situation, though inevitable, could be seen as a turning point for the dairy industry, but whether for better or for worse is yet to be seen. This is worse than no help. It is cruel. Dean's Food blames Walmart because Walmart has set up its own bottling plant. Neither the head of the Dairy Council or the Extension agent are willing to go that far. It isn't Walmart's fault, the Extension agent says. They just made the best business decision for them." And so we are to assume that she means that any good business decision justifies the destruction of the land and the people of rural America. Man, it makes me so mad just reading it. Walmart would rather buy milk from one dairy with 5,000 cows than from 100 dairies with 50 cows, even though the health and prosperity of rural America would be far better served by many small dairies than by a single gigantic one. This is a problem in the organic milk business as well. The industry is trying to change organic standards to allow an organic dairy of 30,000 cows to be certified. My grandfather kept on his mind the faces of a few farmers that he was working for. One of the families losing their livelihood because Dean's Food is canceling their contracts is a direct descendant of one of the farmers that my grandfather would name to us, and he is working with us now. His work with the Burley Co-op could and should be replicated to save what is left of the people in Kentucky and who live by farming. Organic Valley, the dairy co-op in Wisconsin, has, in fact, and with success, replicated the work of the Burley Tobacco Program. And they have been helpful to us in our work to establish Home Place Meat, a co-op to support farmers in Henry County, which brings me to our work, which I don't have time to tell you about. Okay, but there are booklets, Debbie says, there. But I am going to say a few things, leaving out, of course, the important things that I should have said. We believe that food is a cultural product, and that to follow my family's example, our work at the Berry Center must include the art and science of farming. Demand for well-raised local products going up has met the rural culture coming down. There are fewer and fewer of us who can recognize what is happening. Only 16% of us live in rural places, and of that percentage, 0.75% farm. It seems to me that our work is to get hold of what is left of the old culture of thrift, husbandry, and neighborliness, and to strengthen it. How can farmers afford to farm well, and how do we become a culture that will support good farming? These may be the most important questions of our time, and yet they are nowhere in the public discourse. Right now, farmers are offered two choices in American agriculture, either small and entrepreneurial or large and industrial, with almost nothing in the middle. And I'm going to stop now. I've said very many meaningful things in these last pages, but I'm going to stop and say that we're trying to put something in the middle. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to say, I don't know if this is on. Just to say, too, yes, there's a back where the bookstore is. If you want to learn more about the programs, the part that Mary couldn't talk about in detail about the Berry Center, we have various literature, and you can sign up and become a member and also learn, receive our newsletters and learn more about what's happening at the Berry Center.
Good job, Debbie.
Okay. Switching gears to the impartial moderator.
I don't understand impartiality. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So you spoke to this a bit, but perhaps you'd want to comment a bit more. You and I often talk about how it's so surprising when you go to especially very urban places and, well, California writ large, where where organic food is everywhere and school gardens are everywhere, and you know, in other urban places like New York, and people must think there's a thriving economy for farmers and for organic farmers. But as we know, that's just not been the place. The paradigm of industrial agriculture is very still front and center, firmly planted in our country. A lot of it has to do with economic globalization. You know, instead of working with, say, organic cotton farmers in California when I lived there, companies found it much cheaper, who had good values that they wanted to have to use organic, but they found it much cheaper to get organic cotton from Turkey or India or places like this. So we're leaving our culture.
Well, I think that even the apologists for conventional agriculture, well, I should say this another way. Anything Walmart wants to call a good business decision it's legal. My friend Wes Jackson talks about the high moral and then what's legal. And it's legal to destroy Eastern Kentucky so that we have cheap energy. Right. It's legal to destroy rural America so that our cheap food policy will continue.
Right. And this term of protectionism, too. I was having a discussion last night with someone about, you know, we talk again about, oh, it's wrong in the free market. We don't want to have protectionism. But that's really absurd because we want to protect the things we care about and we love. And so you then put measures in place so that you can do that, right? The other aspect of maybe to just address is, you know, what's happening for the nanosecond after the presidential election. Everyone wants to know what's happening in rural America. That conversation has kind of stopped, or the interest has a little bit stopped, but we want to keep pushing that. And why does it matter? Why should it matter to the rest of the country what's happening in rural America?
Well, partly because what's happening in rural America got us Donald Trump, in part anyway. When Donald, after the last election, the phone started ringing at the Berry Center. The election would have been a Tuesday. I guess Wednesday morning we knew, and the phone started ringing from people all over the country, wanting to know what in the hell had happened, what was going on in rural Kentucky. And while I was horrified by the election of Donald Trump, I was not at all surprised But I have been surprised at the anger toward rural America. We've been treated as a sacrifice zone for a long, long time, with our raw materials stolen at the lowest possible price or just stolen. So we've got now, I was thinking about this morning, the country culture that remains, there is still some of it, and we're working with young farmers who are called to farm and who know something about it, and new farmers too. But the economic winners, the children, grandchildren of small farmers, great-grandchildren now, I guess, in rural Kentucky, around where I live, the winners are spending their lives in the power plants up and down the Ohio River. And I'll have to say, they don't understand what's happened to them. And that this has nothing to do with how, I'm not talking about how bright they are. I'm talking about they're mad at the wrong people. And it's heartbreaking. And what we have, so what we have is a kind of pseudo country culture of bad music and camouflage and four-wheelers, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
And as you say, when areas are ignored and really threatened and ripped off over and over again, they're going to go somewhere for some change. Because
well, you can't simply pull an economy out from under people and expect them to
carry on and act,
as they should.
Right. Do any of the other panelists have either questions or comments upon what Mary's just spoken about?
I have to visit the center. I need to go.
Yes. You must
What'd you
visit-
say? I can't.
She has to visit the center.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
As everyone should.
As everyone should.
you're all
It's
welcome
only
to
40
Morocco
miles
too.
from here.
Yes.
And you all welcome to Morocco too. It's not that far.
I was just saying, so in Maryland too, and in the Jewish community, there are these young, folks with stars in their eyes who say, "I want to get back to the land." There is a back to the land movement, and you said you're dealing with them. Can you tell us just some things? How are you inspiring them, and how are you helping them economically survive?
We've started something called Home Place Meat, and we're starting with roast veal, which is a product, calf slaughtered right off its mother, or processed, processed right off its mother at 600, 650, not finished at 1,500 pounds. And my coworker, Katie Ellis, has done remarkable work to figure out how to add value and to the product, and to figure out what a parity price is. Do you all know what parity is? Oh, good.
For those who don't, I should say. Yes.
Oh, I thought that was everybody. Well, the simplest definition of parity is that a farmer would get back his or her cost of production, and keep something. Right now, corn farmers are selling under the parity price. The subsidies are keeping them going. It's costing more to raise the corn than they could get when they sell it. Soybeans also. This is the story of agriculture, modern agriculture in America.
Let me ask another question, because
I didn't give you a very good answer to the beef program, but you can read about it in our booklet.
I will read about it in your booklet. But there's also, a move in the environmental community to move away from animal products and move to whole foods. I mean, but basically non-animal. How does that affect you?
It makes me mad.
But as an environmentalist who knows...
Well, let me say first that the environmental community has needed to think more about working landscapes than it's ever been willing to do. It's as if the country is separated between the wild places that need to be preserved and our great misused, abandoned countryside that we can do anything we want to with. That's crazy. Now, in, not that you're crazy.
No, but it is a movement in the environmental community to say we have to reduce our consumption of meat. We have to reduce our consumption
I
of
agree.
dairy.
I don't think people need to eat as much meat as they're eating. The product that we're starting with, the co-op has started with, is less meat, better meat, smaller pieces of meat, and not finished at 1,500 pounds on corn, but finished on grass and mother's milk at 600, 650 pounds. I don't think it's possible for farmers in a state like ours to make a living on this marginal landscape without protein. And the average cattle herd size in Kentucky is 27 mother cows. I mean, this is small. They don't enter the feedlot system until they leave our largely organic, perennial pastures. Then they're sold at weaning weight into our nightmare of a food system.
And I think also there's that aspect of, what kind of meat? Again, is it large livestock, unhealthy, CAFOs? Or, so for example, a lot of the emerging soil science is showing that it's absolutely necessary to have manure from cattle and grazing in order to restore the soil matter in the proper way and keep carbon sequestration in the ground instead of going up in the atmosphere, things like that. So it's that holistic, integrated manner that we would work with animals and the whole cycle. That's
My
important.
grandfather, who I spoke about a minute ago, said that the way to make money in Kentucky is grass. It's perennial. It's magic what cows do with it. And it's the best farming left in the state. There's just no question.
Do you want to, we need to be wrapping up, I think, because we, instead of having the interlude we were having, I think what we're going to just be having is probably wrapping up so that we can have the section on the sacred feminine from Florence. But to your question, too, about the farming program that's coming here and that we hope to model is going to be great help to younger farmers, too. Do you want to talk about that?
We're starting the Windleberry Farming Program in Newcastle, Kentucky, in partnership with a wonderful little college in Vermont called Sterling College. It's in the Northeast Kingdom. Our program will be a program of Sterling College. We will use their accreditation, and we'll have students there their junior and senior years. It's a work college, so they'll be working, so we can use what's left of our culture to educate young people.
That's great.
And Mom says Dad's going to teach. Isn't that right, Mom?
All right. I apologize, we won't have time for questions, but of course you can speak to these ladies afterward. They'll be back in the bookstore, I believe, and gather literature and learn more about this amazing work. Just to say, the hope really is in that people are looking at this holistic vision. We have to take in, as we say, we know the planet and people and all together, and that's what brings about health and justice and equity to all. So thank you so much for your insights and grace and wisdom on this issue. Thank you all for listening, and we'll end this session. And now have Idona Pucci join us. Yes, let's first end this. And as I mentioned, there'll be now a session on the sacred feminine of women in Florence. Please welcome Idona Pucci.
Well, thank you so much. And after listening yesterday to the mission of the Thistle Farm, and today, this morning, the Panchamama, and now to these remarkable women and men who endow this extraordinary festival of faith with the role, the unique role, visionary role in today's America and in the world. Also, there is a connection, a special connection between Kentucky and my city of Florence, because Wendell Berry came there many, many years ago and was inspired by the history of rural Tuscany, which now is threatened like the one in Kentucky. I speak slowly. I'm sorry, I have only 7 minutes. But anyway, so after listening to all these incredible voices, I'm afraid that I'm going to take you back 7 centuries, when the rural life was absolutely pure. And to this church, simply because, well, it's called the Basilica of the Annunciation, because it houses, is the home of a painting, one of the first scenes of the Annunciation. So we enter inside, and in this shrine, there is this scene. And it's one of the first moments painted in which we see a young girl that receives the message of her unusual destiny. And it's, I have to say something about the meaning of the Annunciation, because when I was a little girl studying catechism, I found all the story about Virgin Mary a little bit absurd, and I was 8 years old. And I already knew out of instinct that it was a little bit absurd. And and all these metaphors that are metaphors really are taken literally, unfortunately, like the resurrection of the body. And I got my own interpretation, which was actually confirmed by a fantastic woman who read Dante and interpreted Dante not literally. And it was that the Virgin Mary represents actually the earth. And it's only in virgin territory, we can go on to the next picture. It's only in a virgin territory, which means pure territory, that life can be sown and grow. And so it's really, she has to be pure. She mustn't be contaminated. And it's the story that led to this painting is quite extraordinary, which has made this painting miraculous. Miraculous means healing, really. And the painter in 1250, a long time ago, he had painted everything, the cloak, everything, but the face had remained. He just couldn't get to paint this purity. And so I think, it's a legend, but all legends are rooted in truth. He must have gone into a trance, and we know that even today many people, indigenous people, we call them, but actually normal mankind, can go in trance, can go in an ecstasy, in another dimension. And he fell asleep. he fell asleep, and when he woke up, the face had been painted. So it's the idea of this other force, this invisible force that acts on art and our life, and also in art, because art is supposed to elevate, supposed to bring you to the other dimension. So this annunciation and the miraculous power, the healing power, became a magnet to people. And this led to Florence becoming the only city in Italy. Well, at that time it wasn't Italy. It was all these small republics. Becoming the only city, still now, that is devoted to the cult of the feminine energy, to the Madonna. Madonna, donna means lady in Italian, and probably also in Spanish. And it's my lady, my feminine energy. And so we go forward, and now this is the way. At the same time, this is a Byzantine painting of the Madonna. It's completely different. It is matriarchal. It is the matron, and it's not even Mother Earth, because actually Earth doesn't come into question with this image. So what was the mutation of this image into this young, fertile girl? And I think it was the miracle. And then we go on, and we see, you see, this is the ideal of the Virgin. And that's also why virginity was valued, and in a way is still valued. Virginity was valued. It's because it's this absolute pure energy, but it's the energy of life, of enthusiasm, of curiosity, and all those elements that give life. And we have other images of the Virgin. And these are images that are contemplative. One can remain for a few minutes in silence in front of these faces. And then you have, oh yeah, I love this. Now, this is Bronzino. The other one was Botticelli, and the first one, I don't remember. Lippi, Filippo Lippi. Now, this one, to me, is quite extraordinary, because it's the first time, you see, the child is always quite unattractive, usually. You say, why is he so big and fat and a little bit angry also? This is one of the few images of Madonna with a child, and they are similar, because a child should sometimes look like his mother. Okay, so then we go on to the. Okay, now this. Cult of the Madonna led to this image too. Now here you have a very stark, colorful image of Mary, stylized. This was painted 100 years after the first one, of the Annunciation. And here we have a cloak, a habit, and all those circles are guilds. They represent the guilds of the different artisans of the city. But why does she have this cloak? This is called the Madonna of Mercy. Mercy is compassion, but compassion, the moment you have compassion, you feel this urge to protect the person or the thing or the little land that you have compassion for. So this is a compassionate Madonna figure, and she protects the guilds, the artisans. And around her are the people of Florence, are the people of the city. And she is the protective symbol. Now, this image, which we brought, Christy Brown to see in Florence, is what inspired, all the people who go to Florence. They go and see the Duomo and the cupola. There was a book in America, was a bestseller, Brunelleschi's Dome. Brunelleschi's being the architect of the cupola, this strange cupola, which is kind of unique because it's architecturally is held, it looks as if it's held by no beams, and it's huge. And we go to the next image. Yeah, these are the people of Florence who want protection, because we all want protection. Every human being actually would love somebody up there, an inspired leader who protects them. So this is the city, the baptistry where children get baptized, and we go to the next one, and this is the Duomo. And the Duomo, Brunelleschi, 100 years later, so we are talking in a 200 range time span, he was inspired by the cloak of that image that we saw, and the Duomo is in the shape of the habit of the Madonna protecting the city. So we Florentines, when we look up, we say, oh, she's still there. And we are really, really, we feel very fortunate. Thank you very much.